outfits together. So with that, we are going to have our first speaker come up. It's Beatrice Alain from Chantier de l'économie sociale. She's going to be talking about the social solidarity economy in Quebec, Canada. Chantier brings together actors and partners in the social economy in Quebec in order to promote collective entrepreneurship and develop sectors and tools that are able to support the development of solidarity, equity, and accountability in Quebec. So I'm a big fan of the slow clap. So, oh, that's not my pocket. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna do this. So you're with me, right? Okay, so we're gonna slow clap and bring Beatrice on the stage. Okay, so. Hey, Beatrice!
Hi. It's nice to be here. So I wanted to talk about what we call the social economy in Quebec. I just wanted to make maybe two parentheses before starting. The first one, I think because I was following what's been going on in the US, but also in other places, and I think it's important to talk about the economy, but when basic human rights are being violated, when people don't have the access to life, liberty, human dignity, obviously the priority is not your economic model, it's being sure that you're safe and your families are safe. So it can be maybe spurious to some people to be talking about this, even though I think an unbalanced economy contributes to the root problem that people take their rights taken away. And the other point I wanted to make was sometimes the Quebec experience is perceived as like, well, that's nice, you guys are some utopia out there. I don't think Quebec is a utopia in any way. I think we have a lot of things that we need to improve or build. But I also think it's not up to me to tell anyone else what they should do. I can speak of my experience, and you'll see from that what's applicable, what's completely irrelevant, what's really ambitious, and what's really naive. That's up to you. So I think we all need to walk a line between what's ideal and what's realistic. And so I can only speak from what's been happening in Quebec and sort of what we've understood from that. And I hope that some of that resonates with you. But in no way is it the truth or the way or, yeah, it's what you choose to take from it that I think is applicable. So without further ado, I wanted to talk about what we call in Quebec a social economy. Sometimes it's called a social solidarity economy, a solidarity economy. Really, I think the point for me, the key part of this is the notion of social economy. Social comes from society, right? A collective of individuals. And so a social economy is an economy that answers the needs of society, so the needs, the aspirations of society. The contrast would be an economic society, right? So a society that follows the rules of the economy. So when people, for example, get laid off from their jobs, even though the company they're working for is still making profits, or when people lose all of their savings or their homes because of transactions between faceless corporations, that's society being impacted by the rules of an economic model. And what would it look like if we had an economy that was impacted by the needs and aspirations of our collective, of our society? And I think that notion of harnessing the economy for our society versus our society being impacted by economic change is really at the core of what we're aspiring to. Why are we talking about the social economy? Because I think we've all understood that the model that we're under is unsustainable. Certainly environmentally it's unsustainable, but it's also unsustainable socially. And we can look at that from two ways, either that a few individuals have most of the stuff, but also that together we're much bigger and much more powerful than the 1%. The name, the social economy, exists and is used in most Latin-speaking countries. So, France, Portugal, most of Latin America, Quebec, because we speak French. It's not so much known here. There's a UN task force on the social and solidarity economy. And I think that reflects both that within communities, people are organizing. It's not a new way of doing things, right? Communities have always come together to meet basic needs, to trade amongst themselves. But I think it's all the more necessary in times of crisis. And at the macro level, governments are seeing that we have problems, and what academics call wicked problems, that are way too complex to have one expert within government or in a private consulting firm come in and give a solution and apply that across the board. Each community has its own sets of resources, of priorities, of things that they want to work on. And I think we're seeing a growing realization that these practices that emerge from communities that are owned and managed by communities in function of their resources are really important in addressing some of those problems because they touch on economic development, but also social cohesion, cultural vitality, etc. So actually, there are practices all over the world that try to do this, provide for food safety, I don't know the word in English, food safety, permanent and affordable housing, cultural expressions. I'm going to talk about one experience, which is in Quebec, which is a province in Canada, which is majority French-speaking, and has its own sort of cultural and history around the social economy. So here are some of the numbers in Quebec of the social economy. So in Quebec, we don't have government statistics, but by our accounts, we're talking about a little bit over 7,000 enterprises, providing over 212,000 jobs. That's not a lot maybe for the US, but we're not that many people in Quebec. What that means, it's actually 1 job in 20 is in the social economy. Most importantly, if you look at the size of this economy in comparison to major sectors of the economy, and I saw that in St. Louis there's Boeing. In Quebec we have Bombardier, which is a big deal for us, which is an aeronautic company. That's minor compared to the weight of the social economy. And of course, what these numbers don't account for is all of the other impact in terms of social cohesion, in terms of human dignity, in terms of cultural vitality, in terms of community resiliency, which are much harder to measure, but are much more important in the long run. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got there. As Mo mentioned, I come from the Chantier de l'économie sociale. And really the core mission of the Chantier is to bring together sectoral networks, territorial networks, but also partners of the social economy. So other movements working for a more equitable and more sustainable economy, and think collectively and strategically about what we can do to enable more of these enterprises and ultimately create a space, transform our economic model. And so this work over 20 years has led to an ecosystem that supports the development of enterprises, but also reinforced the capacity of organizations and networks to not just think about access to housing or food sovereignty or local development, but to think that local development is one action in service of a broader economic transformation, and that access to housing is going to make a difference in the community and local services that are locally owned and where the benefits are redistributed will have a broader impact in the community, and this is all what we want. So what are some of the lessons that we learned from this experience? The first one is, I think, the importance of mobilization. That was really key in Quebec. The fact that we had a common terminology around the social economy, which is not saying that the term is better than solidarity economy or social solidarity economy or new economy coalition or community economic development. Those are all valid terms. But agreeing, having one broad umbrella that everyone recognizes, means that we can come together and work together. And it also means, keeping going. It also means that it was, so coming together, being able to think creatively about what our common needs are and what tools, either built by us or public policies or promotion will answer those needs, has been really important. The second one is around transformation. I think that the purpose of this exercise was not to defend or to promote what was existing, but really to develop more and more in order to transform the economy. So the Chantier doesn't work in favor of its members. The members around the Chantier work together to develop tools that will not only serve their organizations and their enterprises, but will enable the creation of new organizations and enterprises. And ultimately the idea is that when more and more of our economy is controlled collectively, and when the benefits are going down to the users and workers and producers, then we transform the economic model. And I think the third point that I would want to make is that this work is eminently political. Even though we're working in the economy and we're working with economic actors, clearly the idea is to shift the power dynamic. And in that, we need to be making alliances and talking with other actors who also have a vision of transformation. So social justice movements, the environmental movement, the labor movement are all potential allies. And when we're working together to create a fund to support social economy enterprises, to create public policy to enable governments to purchase preferentially from social economy enterprises, to create new innovative ways to reuse collective infrastructure like abandoned warehouses and churches and things that the community is paid for in any case. When we work together to find the tools and the ambition and the ideas to do that, we're reclaiming the control of our resources and how they're going to be developed in the future. So I wanted to maybe touch on one provocative idea, because I think it's a really strong point that we have in Quebec, and it's not so widely accepted in the US, so I'm just going to go for it. The idea being that the social economy, or collective entrepreneurship, the way we define the social economy, it's co-ops and enterprising nonprofits. So they're managed collectively, owned collectively, and the benefits go to members or the community. And that this is really has more impact than individuals with good intentions. So individuals with good intentions is great. Social enterprises owned by individuals do really valid work to address a certain issue, but I think there's three important limitations to that we need to see. The first one is that if I have an enterprise that's serving a community, how accountable am I to that community about the services that I'm rendering? How do I know that that's really, that if I'm giving them free shoes, it's really shoes that they want and not school books or whatever? Second of all, so when the community has a seat at the table and it owns the initiative, then they have a word in saying what you can use or can't use, or how you should shift the model. Should we increase profits in order to be able to expand for a while, or should we reduce profits to increase accessibility? It's really important that the community has a seat around the table and owns the initiative. The second point is about profit redistribution. If my social enterprise goes really well, and hopefully it does if it has a good social mission, we're still perpetuating that a few individuals are reaping economic benefits, and we're not changing the economic power dynamic. So again, collective ownership means that the benefits from any economic activity are redistributed collectively and equitably. And the third limitation in terms of individual initiatives is the perennity, is the lasting impact of that. And I think we all know cases like, Ben & Jerry's had this really great mission and then they sold to Unilever and that sort of, or the Body Shop, or just an individual who for a couple of years, has a home crisis and needs to pay their mortgage and maybe doesn't distribute as much as they used to, doesn't put aside 10% for their charity work or whatever. Again, the fact when an initiative is owned and managed collectively by the community that's benefiting from it, they're best able to say, in times of crisis, yeah, maybe we will cut some of the profits or cut some of the, raise the prices or however the arrangement is going to be, but they'll be the guardians of that mission. And so we see in Quebec that collective enterprises last longer than individually owned enterprises, but also the mission they stay true to their mission forever because that's at the core of their creation. And my other maybe contrast on the other side is the idea that the economy per se is a bad thing and we should just exit the economy. And so we can have a barter economy based on reciprocity and solidarity, and that's also a really nice idea. But there's a couple of problems with that, in my opinion. Obviously, we all do that in our community. You help out your neighbor who's just broken their leg and you bring them a casserole and you babysit your kids, your friends' kids, and those kinds of reciprocity agreements happen and are a normal representation of a cohesive society. But I think when it has an ambition to become a system, we there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, if you take activities away from the economy, you take away taxation, and therefore you limit the capacity of states to provide a basic social safety net to all people. And that's really important. Regardless of how well governments work in each community, the role the government are supposed to do is provide basic services equally for everyone, and they can't do that if no one's paying taxes anymore because it's off the grid. The second point is that it's a great idealistic world, but it's sort of detached from the rest of the economy. So you're not changing private enterprises. You're not changing the ones who don't care could still be purchasing from you and using some of their resources to support the structural work that you're doing, or could be selling, or you could buy them over and make worker co-ops or whatever and own those enterprises. So I think if we're really aiming to transform our economy, we need to get in there and engage with it and not build a parallel utopia that'll serve a couple of very noble militant people but won't transform the lives of everyone, whether they're engaged or not. Yeah, ultimately, I think what we should aspire to is a balanced economy. A balanced economy is one where the public sector, and this is an aspiration, I don't think this is the case anywhere, though I think we've seen extremes, certainly of a totally public economy and a very nearly private economy. But I think a balanced economy is one where the state has an interest, the interests of treats everyone identically, and that's important. But we also need to account for the individual initiatives and collective well-being. And some issues, cultural vitality, the management of local resources, they need to be managed, they need to be harnessed collectively. It can't be identical across the country, and it certainly can't be according to the market or profit priorities of corporations. I think to conclude, it's clear that we're currently in an unbalanced economy and that several issues are being looked at as issues that should be resolved by a private corporation that's going to think about maximizing their profits rather than an issue that's a collective issue that should be resolved according to the priorities, the needs, and the resources of that community. And so, in conclusion, I would say that the important thing is to take back that power and to take back our economy, take back the levers of control, buy those companies, own those companies, work with those companies, transform those companies, and take back our economy. Thank you.